All right. This is a kind of a unique experience for me. I don't normally talk about myself in this kind of setting, so bear with me, please. And if it, I'm gonna give a brief overview of like who I am and I guess what I've done and how I got there, and then we'll just open it. I find the Q&A is always a lot more engaging because I'm gonna throw I, comic industry is a really bizarre, strange industry that is unlike any industry I've ever encountered in my entire life because there's no right or wrong way to do it. Well, I should say there's no right way to do it, but there's certainly wrong ways to. And there's no direct path into the profession. So I am a professional comic book artist. I work primarily mainstream comics. So the things that my name gets most associated with is like Ninja Turtles and Godzilla. Weirdly, I didn't really work on them that much. I've done tons of other books, but those are the things that's like you do something that resonates with fans just enough, and you're like the Ninja Turtles and Godzilla guy. And so I'm kind of like in that boat, even though I probably at this point I probably have anywhere from 10 to 15 different titles under my belt. But so I got into I was a rural kid. I grew up in the Cascades of Washington State. So not a lot of comic books. The only really comic I even had experience with was Captain America because they sold it at the grocery store. And so you buy it off the newsstand. Like they don't even do that anymore, right? They don't even have like a magazine stand, I don't think. Maybe you can get some Archie comics. But so I didn't have comics in my, they were like more of my peripheral. I didn't have access to them that much. It wasn't until I went to college and I went in thinking I was going to be a veterinarian for exotic animals. I went to Washington State University and they had these great like grizzly bear and elk labs. So I was like, that's what I'm going to work with. I'm going to work with being a vet for wildlife. And quickly got into it, realized I am not, the old noggin was not built for the sciences at all. I appreciate them. I loved reading about it. But man, when it came to like chemistry, biology, I just fell apart. I couldn't keep up. So then I switched over to a fine arts, and that's when I rediscovered comics. There was a great comic shop in the area, and I was so blown away at how like you have these guys that are working on these books, and guys and gals. And the most impressive thing to me was that they had the ability to draw anything. They could draw a folding chair. They could draw the insides of a Ford Mustang, and they could turn around and draw like something as surreal as like monsters and mayhem and prehistoric animals. And so I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to be somebody who can draw anything. And I ended up doing a little research because like Washington State University, as great as it was, did not known for its art program. And so I applied to a bunch of different art schools throughout the country. And I got into a school, it was kind of my number one choice. It's called the Joe Kubert School of Cartooning and Graphic Design. You may have heard of it if you've read any comic from the 80s through the early 2000s. There was probably an advertisement for the school in one of the books. And so I went there and I studied under the amazing Kubert family. Joe Kubert, he was in his 80s. And then his sons, Adam and Andy, they were, Adam was, he's currently like a Marvel guy. Andy is a DC guy. Joe at the time, he was working at, I think he was working on Conan the Barbarian or something like that. And so I went through the school program, and Joe had a small studio with a military contract and it was for PS Magazine. And I don't know, is anybody military here? No. So PS Magazine was started during World War II, and they were having a hard time connecting connecting their field manuals for training with some of the soldiers like on base. So they came up with PS Magazine, and it was a comic book they would put out monthly, but it was all comics like, hey, we're going to show you how to get the sand out of your M16, or here's how you change a tire on a Humvee. And so I, during the summers, would work on these comics where it was just, I can't even remember the name of the characters, but, like, oh, this is how this is how we clean the props on the helicopter. And I did that for like a year or two. And I also had a side job where I did security at the Kubert building. And they only hired one security guard. But you wanted the job because you had access to the school. And so, and you had to be there on Saturdays when there was no school. But Joe, the legendary Joe Kubert, he was in his studio every Saturday, every Sunday. So I would go in on the weekends, and I would do my security job, but then I would also stay and work. And then I would have access to Joe, so I'd go knock on his door. And usually he's supposed to be working, but he'd just be in there like listening to music and eating sandwiches and stuff. And so I probably learned more in just kind of like weaseling my way into getting these private sessions with Joe Kubert, And he said to me, he's like, because I was working at Telegraphics, and he goes, listen, Telegraphics is fine, but if there's something you really want to do, go for it. Like, you got to go. Don't get stuck doing something that, take risks, go for it. And I was like, whoa, like I've never had anyone say anything like that to me before. I thought art school was a risk in itself, right? Like, okay. So I was thinking about going to, at the time, this was probably around like 2009, 2010, Portland, Oregon was like the mecca of the comic industry. Almost, I would say maybe probably 50% of the working artists at the time were living in the area. And so I was like, we're going to Portland. We got to move to Portland as soon as we graduate. And Joe got me an internship, or not an internship, but an interview at Dark Horse Comics. They do like Hellboy, and at the time they had Conan and Aliens and Predator comics. And I was like, oh, sweet. This is it. This is my big break. I'm in. I got it. It's going to be awesome. I go and do the interview. They're like, wow, we love your energy. You're terrible. You're not good enough to work for us. But there is a studio that you can do an internship with, and you never know who's going to walk through the door there. And so I applied, and I got the internship there in downtown Portland. And that really ended up being like what set me in the right direction, because I wasn't very good. I had good storytelling, but I wasn't a good, like my whole thing, like, oh, I'm going to go and be able to draw anything. Well, the editors at the time and the companies were like, you're not good enough at drawing anything yet to actually work for us. But the one thing I could do is storytelling, and I could draw backgrounds really well. And so I ended up working as a ghost. Does anybody know what a ghost is? No? Okay, so a ghost is when a really famous artist or writer basically has too much work. They're too successful. And so they have this overflow, and they know that by themselves they can't hit their deadlines. So they hire guys like me, and then they pay you to do their work for them. So I basically was working for like 5 or 6 different very successful artists that were all working at like Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, Image Comics, and I would have to emulate their style. So not only did I have to draw the stuff that they didn't want to draw, so like the cars, the engines, I got really good at drawing animals, and so guys would literally just hire me. Like my last ghosting gig, they just had me come in and draw like prehistoric animals. It was like some DC book. I think it was Johnny Quest. They were like in the prehistoric dimension or something like that. Anyways, doesn't matter. And so that's what I did for like probably like 4 or 5 years. And I was making like a decent living doing it. And the best thing is that slowly word started getting out that like, oh, hey, there's this guy. His name's not on any titles, but he's got 5 Marvel books that are on the shelf right now. He just drew all the garbage nobody else wants to draw, but like he's working. And so it ended up leading to me getting my first shot. Really, it was like it all happened in like 1 month. It's like, oh, you want to do a cover for Godzilla? Yes. Do you want to do a cover for Ninja Turtles? Yes. Do you want to do a cover for King Kong? Yes. So that kind of like set me off working. And then from there, I started getting like more narrative gigs where it was like I got to be not just a cover artist, but I got to be the lead artist on stuff. And I then got my this was like my first like big break. I landed like sold a graphic novel to Oni Press, and and then I worked on that, and then that COVID hit right when it was coming out, which was kind of like crushing because the world shut down. So nobody heard that this came out. It kind of came out quietly, but it didn't matter because I'd proven myself in the industry at that point. And so now I just work on all kinds of books, and I work indie, mainstream. I just had a big book announced over at Comic Pro Thursday down in LA, called Showdown with Ignition Press, which is like a big brand new publisher. And anytime you're working for a new publisher and they're taking a big risk on bringing you in because they need to be successful. And so, I guess like that would be like my story, my trajectory. So even if people are like, you're not good enough, you might not be, but that doesn't mean you just stop. You just keep going and going, and eventually you get good enough, and then people will like take you seriously. It can be a longer, like I know guys that like, man, they just showed up and they got the dream job and is great. But, you're limited when you get those big opportunities right out of the bat, because you're usually being celebrated for drawing one thing. Where I can say that every project I do looks a little bit different than the last. So if you read this, or you're going to read Showdown, or I've got another series out, First Americans. All of them look very, very different. It's a very different style of storytelling, and that's from my days of working as a ghost, mimicking other storytellers' style. So that's pretty much it. Again, I'm not good at this, so I apologize. But if you have any questions, please ask away, because we've got 15 minutes. John. Yeah. Well, I'll be honest, because this was not a fast sale. I probably took like a year to do like the first 20 pages of this. And then I would pick at it and pick at it. And then like I had meetings with Disney and Oni, or not Oni, well, yeah, Oni, Dark Horse, Marvel. I had meetings with pretty much everybody for this book. Um, and for Oni to really like say yes to this, like weird. I'd already been shopping around for like 5 years, so this technically took 10 years to make. Like while I was doing the whole ghosting gig. I mean, I sold this when I still lived in Portland, and like, I think I started originally working on this probably like 2013 or something, and then it didn't come out till 2019. So it took a long time. I'd also say to get more to that question is like I went to more of an old school tradition, the Kubert school. It's not like that anymore, but it was based. It was ran by guys who drew comics in the 50s and 60s when print didn't use photography because it was expensive. So they hired people to draw, and so the skill set was you had to draw in that, like we've all seen the like old ads from the 60s. It's very fairly like classic, but it was also very semi-realistic. So that was where my foundation is. And honestly, if you want to work, you have to be fast. So, like I wouldn't say it's just a different way to approach. We probably draw at the same speed, but like I was just trained in a different way. Like I kind of sometimes, and this is probably a knock on me, I sometimes look at cartoonists, people who have very cartoony styles, and I go, "Oh, you guys got an easy street. That's easy, man. I got to do like photo reference. I got to set up lights in my studio and be like, how does the light fall on the skull to see how that works? Like this was a nightmare, because I had to do anatomy studies on animals that don't exist anymore. And so like when you're cartoony, I think you get a little bit of a leniency on that. Not that it's not any easier, but you don't have to. There's certain things, liberties that you can take that you don't get away with doing it in a more like semi-realistic style. So yeah, I don't know. It's just like speed. Like one of my favorite artists is a guy named Goran Parlov, and if you looked at his work, he takes forever, and it's very simplistic. But I think maybe it's also like being a minimalist on the page sometimes takes a lot more time because you're bringing in. You really have to like think like, okay, what lines work, what lines don't. So you're doing a lot of like elimination. So that could be it. But yeah, no, I'll take that as a huge compliment. Like, yeah, I'm keeping up with the cartoony guys. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. Oh. Yeah. In the red shirt there. Oh. Yeah, that, pardon my French, sucked. That sucked. You know what? I think it came from the PS Magazine, the military, because that job was intense. And it was ran like an old school studio. And where it was, like we've all had jobs where we like got in a little bit of trouble. Well, if you get in trouble in the studio, it was ran by a guy named Pete. He was the editor, one of the editor in chief, underneath Joe. So Joe approved everything, but Pete was the guy who handled all day-to-day operations. He'd come to your desk, and he would just put his hand on your desk like this and be like, "You get better." That was it. If you came in the next day and you were still drawing at the same level, they would just tell you to leave. Like right then and there. I watched grown men like trying to hold back tears as they were told, "You're not good enough, go home." And it was because it was, again, 50s mentality. It's like you can either do it or you can't. And like that was a big like, oh, like I grew up playing sports. And so it kind of reminded me of like the sports, like, oh, you wanna be on the team? You gotta beat out 5 other guys to have that spot. So it was kind of that same mentality. And I think having that, being terrified of being fired, when I would come in and do ghosting gigs, yeah, I was like, okay, I would look at the work and be like, all right, we're doing, I'm doing a Steve Lieber style. Okay, I know he works digitally. This is how the biggest thing is I would try and find out people's process. So like when I read comics now, I'm more impressed by guys where I'm like, I cannot figure out how they're approaching making their pages, because that's just like, usually I can look at a page and be like, okay, they're using digital. There's some serious photo manip going on. They're doing some tracing. They're importing some SketchUp. They're bringing some models and blah blah blah. Or it's like, oh, I'm familiar with the artist's work, and so like I've gotten really good at doing that. That was part of the skill set for being a solid ghost. Like I had to mimic a guy named Matthew Clark, and he was a DC artist at the time. And I think I can talk about that. I don't think I'd get in trouble. Nobody's filming. We're fine. I don't even know what he's working on these days. So I haven't talked to him in like 10 years. So we'll be fine. He super detailed. And it was like a DC book, like I forget what the title was. But they ended up doing like a TV show on like FX with it. And that was the hardest because it was like, oh, he's in a skill set. He's 20 years my elder. He's way more experienced drawing. I have to mimic his, and that was just like really, really challenging because there was so much detail. The best was when I got to do more cartoony people. Like I got to I ghosted on Ninja Turtles before I even got hired by the Turtles people. I did almost a whole issue because the artist was getting married, but he had a real cartoony style, so it was like beautiful, perfect. And yeah, I banged that out in super fast. It was great. So it just all depended, it was one of those things that was like desperation too, whereas like I've always been in a situation where as an artist you need time to grow your skills and your craft. And the best is if you have some kind of financial support because you need to live and whatnot. And that's very common. Like you see a lot of socioeconomic barriers in art. I didn't come from a background where I could take like a year off and work on my graphic novel, or I could, take whatever time, or like I didn't have like grant money or something like that, which that's it. Those are all wonderful things because it allows you to build something out like this. And so I saw it as like, all right, I have people I have to support. We have to pay bills. We need money. If I go do something else, this is never going to happen. I just know that about myself. I'm going to go, oh, I'm getting really good at this welding thing. We're just going to run with that because it's, making life comfortable. So I purposely kind of was like, I'm going to keep myself in a place of discomfort, and I have to do well at this ghosting thing because it's the only job I can get drawing. So let's just make it work. It's kind of that whole thing of like, where like under pressure is when you're forced to like push yourself past like your boundaries. Like I feel the last couple of years I've gotten kind of soft because like things are going like okay in life, I guess. And like I just got hired onto this new book, and it was one of those where it's like I was kind of approaching it the same way at first, and I was like, man, like I'm not fulfilled with where I'm at. Like I need to start pushing it again like I did when I was in Portland, and start doing the 13, 14-hour days again. Like I don't have to, but it's one of those where it's like, oh, I want to get through this book, do not only get better like on the page, but then also like just destroy my deadline where I finish it a month ahead of time. Then I'll have all that time to like pitch the next project, maybe to this company or the other company, but I'll have all that momentum of, like, oh, I've leveled up and I've created this space where like I can now try and get another one of these type books going or something like that. So it's, it's one of those, like, if you're not a self-motivated person, I would say comic industry is not for you because it will crush you, it will bury you. Cause like you're literally working, like when I went to the Kubert school, I didn't know anything about comics. I didn't even know who Jim Lee was. Everybody knows who Jim Lee was. I knew Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and that was like it. I go walk in there and everybody knows like John Buscema and, whoever, Jim Lee and David Finch and Alex Ross. They're dropping all these names, and I'm like, I'm just here to draw good. Like, what are we doing? Tell a story, maybe. And but you realize that like, oh, all these kids this is all they've ever wanted to do. This is like them like getting to go to summer training camp or something like that, and the next step is making it to the big leagues. Like this is, so it was one of those where it's like, oh, okay, like this is what you're competing against. And then you get out of school and the people that you look up to, like Ab and Andy Kubert, it's like, oh, that's right, I'm now competing against them for jobs. So cool. So you have to find like a niche, but like you also have to stay. I think that one of the Chickaloonie guys said something yesterday about like being hungry, and there's a truth to that. Like you have to like, I mean, you have to be like very unsatisfied, I think, because you'll just get kind of like left behind. And you see artists that will happen, not to make it like, not to be a negative, I guess, but it's a super competitive industry. Like there was a writer, David Walker, him and I were talking about it a few years ago, and he goes, there's more people playing in the NBA than there are working in mainstream comics. So he goes, if you can make it and have a job at some point every year in mainstream comics, that's like being above like being drafted to the NBA. And actually I was like, whoa, that's crazy. I never thought about that way. And like everybody write movies, TV shows, super mainstream right now. Everybody wants to be a comic artist or thinks they want to be a comic artist. And so it's like incredibly competitive. Like the art that's coming out now out of art, like colleges. Cause like when I was looking to go to college or go to school for comics, there's like maybe 3-4 programs in the country. Now there's like one in almost every state. There's so many art programs. There's like 3 or 4 in like, Minneapolis and Portland and Seattle. And I mean, I don't even know how many are on the East Coast now. I think like, There's SCAD in Georgia, and then you've also got like I think the School of Visual Arts in New York. I think they have a whole like division that's dedicated toward visual storytelling. So like there's a ton of options, and the kids that are coming out of there are just I mean I'm like well I'm glad they're not weren't around when I was coming out of school because I wouldn't have had a chance. Yeah, but any other questions? Anything else? Yeah. Say that again. Ooh. Um, I'll be honest. One of the worst things about myself is I don't like anything I've ever done because it's one of those things where like this, I'm proud of it, but man, it could be so much better. I need to do that. I need to do another volume because it could just be so much better. So I would probably say this is probably my favorite right now, but I'm in such a mode where I've been working on other people's projects the last few years that I really just like I've got a bunch of stuff written that I really want to work on that I really want to put out in the world. So like the stuff that no one's seen is probably my favorite things. But yeah, I mean overall I'd say this is the thing I'm the most proud of because it's all me. Like I wrote it, I sold it, I made it. Yeah, it was just me. Nobody was helping me or anything. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, like you got to also know what your strengths are. So if you can collab with people, do it. I just never been in that position really. So, you just kind of roll with it. But anything else? Any other question? Oh, yes. Oh, okay. That's a great question. We're getting back into the ghost. I love talking about the ghosting because it's like it's one of those things where, did I want to cry myself to sleep every night? Yes, but like I don't do it anymore, so I can look back on it fondly. Like one of those type jobs. Um, I would usually get like 3 or 4 days, and I would pick up batches. So I'd get like 8 pages, right? And the artists, what they would do is they would draw like I'm trying to think of like a book that we worked on, like a uh, like yeah, yeah. I'd say it'd be like a Batman book or something, right? And they would go through and draw all the stuff they wanted to draw. The lead artist, so they'd be like, "Well, I'm drawing Batman. Like that's what I'm here for. I'm drawing Batman." So they would draw. I'd be like, "Draw." I we work on what's blue line. Like I traditionally work on paper, right? And I work with the older artists typically, and they work on paper too, even if they are doing digitally. So what we would do is they would draw everything that they wanted or like lay it all out, right? On the page real loose, and then they would draw and ink the stuff that they were like, okay, it's Batman swinging through Gotham City, right? So Batman would be done. Then I would. This was another great thing at the time. I was one of the few artists in town that had a car. Yeah, and yeah, because they're all like city guys. Like everyone was like they all were born and raised in cities, so none of them even had license. But the beauty of me having a car, I could drive to your house at 11 at night, and I could pick up those batch of 8 page of Batman pages, and then I could drive home, and back then I would had no problem like it's all that the grind mentality. So I would just be like, oh, I got 3 days, I got to get this done in two. So I would just stay up all night. I would just I'd pull an all nighter and be like, oh, the next day call them at text them at 8 or 9 at night and be like, we're done. You want to be ahead of deadline? Yes. And so I drive back over to their house, drop off the pages, get my check or cash or whatever, and then drive. I was like a drug dealer for like comic book art that nobody wanted, except I came to you instead of you coming to me. Yeah. It was interesting. I even got to a point where I got hired by companies to do it. So like Dark Horse once hired me on a book they were 6 months behind deadline on, and they had me come in, and I've just dreamed about walking through those doors not being told to leave, like before. It'd been like 5 years since so they brought me in, sat me, bought me lunch and all that, sat me down, and then I'm looking at all these people that have just, they've done like Hellboy and all these like huge projects, The Goon, and they all turned to me and be like, so how do we do this? How do we get this done? And I was like, well, you just hook me up with the artist and I'll show up at his house when he's done with those pages any hour of the day, and I'll grab them, I'll take them home, and we'll get them finished. And that's what we did. It was great, and it was really good. So I don't know. I hope that kind of answers the question. Um, Yeah, I probably at my height when I was really burning and I was really good at doing backgrounds, I could do like I would do anywhere from like 5 to 6 pages in a day, and by day I mean like an 18-hour period. I can't do that now. You only have. I found out you only have so many all nighters in your life that you can do, and now if you asked me to do an all nighter, I would literally just fall apart. Like I had to do one. I think it was like 3 weeks ago, and I literally like had to take the next day off. I was like, I can't believe I did, because I would do like 3 all-nighters in a week. I would just stagger them out and be like, okay, I'll do one Monday, do one Wednesday, Friday night, I got nothing going on. Let's just do it, get it done, And yeah, it's like I need sleep. I have to sleep now, so yeah. Oh, this is why I quit. This is why I quit. So the very last gig I ghosted on was for a dear friend of mine. Can't say her name. Super talented artist, very famous, very awesome. She's helped me in numerous ways in my career. But she got a job. She was working on a big book at DC, and somehow something happened. She got contracted to do like a 12-page Swamp Thing story, and I was like, okay, like I need. Can you at least will I get credited for it? And she's like, I can't do that for you. Like my career will not. I can't do that. I'm already under enough stress. And so the answer was no. I never got credited for any backgrounds. What's funny though is I had voiced that to a few kind of big name artists that I was working with at the time. Because they would after the Swamp thing, they were like, "Hey, do you want to still do it?" I'm like, "No, man." Like, and I did Swamp Thing. I was on vacation in Hawaii with my wife, so I printed the pages the night we were flying out, and I was like, "Hey, do you mind?" I pulled an all nighter in the hotel room, and I banged out like 5 pages, 6 pages of Swamp Thing, in the hotel room that night. Slept during the day, did it the second. Luckily, we were there for like a week, and my wife was like, "Yeah, fine. This is the last time, though. You're not doing this anymore." The money, it was like the money was good, so I just needed to do it. But it was, I never again. It was I killed all those ghosting brain cells. I just couldn't do it on that one. But anyways, what was I saying is, I voiced my concern after that because I wouldn't get credit on this Swamp Thing story that meant nothing to her. Like as much as she's my friend and I respect the heck out of her, she should have credited me for that. It was ridiculous that I didn't get background credit on that. And it would have been like, I've been trying to get it work, like breaking over at DC for years. Like this would have been huge and nobody would vouch for me. Everybody knew I was there, but they wouldn't, they really kind of kept it hush hush from the higher ups. And because it's like, yeah, artists are very, they might not care about their reputation, but they care about their reputation within the industry. So if word gets out that like maybe you can't deliver work or you need help, artists are always afraid that they're gonna get passed over for jobs. And I got really mad about that after the Swamp Thing, and I voiced it to a lot of people. I would go, I'd be at things like this, and I would talk about it with them sitting right over there, where it's like I backgrounded for you at DC and Marvel for 5 years, and you never once credited me, and which when I was younger it's fine, but now look at it, it's like that would have been a great entryway into my. So like even now, I'll occasionally hire like there was a few students in Anchorage that I've hired to do flats, like set like color setups. It's very easy. Anyone could do it. You could probably teach like your 12-year-old to do it. It's very simple stuff, right? But I credit them. If you ever see an art assistant in any of my books, that they're probably just doing flats for me. But I credit them as a colorist assistant or line assistant because that is a way for them to get entry into the industry and to show that like, hey, they're working, they're hitting deadlines. That's the only thing people care about. And I've noticed there's been a change. I'm not saying it's because of me, but the people that I work with now are all of a sudden crediting their background artists, which I'm like, that would have been real nice like 10 years ago, gang, but whatever. But they do it now. So like, yeah, and they have no problem admitting that they use background artists. And it's good because it's like, yeah, like I worked. There was one time I had a meeting with a company with an editor, and we went to the comic shop because it was downtown Portland, And he goes, "Do you have any books on the shelf?" Because he knew I ghosted. And I was like, "Yeah, there's 8 books right here. There's 8 books on the shelf." And he went, and Mary looked at me and goes, "Man, that's so sad. Your name's not on any of them." And I was like, "Well, you're right." It was one of those where you just die on the inside. And you're like, and that was one of the kind of big turning points where I realized, like, I got to make a change. I got to like get a little bit better, and I got to start going like advocating for myself, because this is I'm kind of getting like I built a reputation for being like, "Oh, you're in a jam? Call Tad. He'll bail you out. Give him some cash, and he'll keep his mouth shut." Like, it was, I don't know. It was great learning. But like, if you look at artists from the 50s and the 40s and even up through the 60s and 70s, that was what you did. You got a job at a studio, and the studio would say it'd have like Will Eisner's name on it. And you would work in that studio for 10, 15 years until you built up your skills. And like, you would start maybe, like I said, doing real basic stuff, background things, ghosting. But like, and then you would work your way up where you're drawing whatever their work they have coming into the studio. And so I kind of did that just by myself, instead of like having a 9 to 5 where I'm working at the studio. I just did it as a freelancer. And, it's good. Like, I got a lot of weird skill sets and, interesting stories. I got to see like how to conduct myself with other artists, with writers, with fans, because like, they don't give you any kind of PR training. And sometimes you see how people operate and you're like, "Well, don't do that. Whoa, don't say that, man. What are you doing?" But yeah. Any other questions? Anything else? Oh, come on. Sure. Yeah. I mean, when I was working on this book, I was really interested in them. And what's weird is I really had to invest a lot of time researching. And at the time, all my work was around like 2010 or so, maybe 2000, probably a little later than that. 2013, 14 is when I was really doing a lot of research. And there just wasn't a lot of stuff online. And so I was referencing books, but books are always like dated. But what's crazy, the last 15 years has just, and I would say probably even the last 10 years has been like the golden age of paleontology. So much stuff has changed. Like, everything has changed about the animals. And so like, I am so invested now. Like, I wish I would have had this kind of like energy when I was in the vet school or pre-vet school, because like, I probably would have been fine. Probably would have made it, reading all the research papers and, all that kind of stuff. And so, like, I'm just really into it now. Like, I'm working with a company on some dinosaur stuff. Like, nothing's official, but like, I might be in like a dinosaur TV show later this summer. Just like in an episode, you pop in. I don't know what they want me to do. They just like want to say, they like, "Oh, the guy who did Cretaceous is here on dig site." Like flying to South Dakota for an hour and then fly home. But I'm just, they're fascinating animals, and that kind of gets forgotten. Like, people, we all see the Jurassic Park movies. They're fun, but like, those aren't dinosaurs. Those are like literally kind of monsters. Like, they're weird. I don't know what you would call them. I have a problem with the latest spew of Jurassic Park movies. I'm like, what are you guys doing, guys? Like, come on. And I also like, I'm a big proponent of silent storytelling. Comics are a visual medium. And so like, the way I judge an artist is by their storytelling. So if I have to, for me, this is just a personal thing. If I have to read what the characters are saying or the narration to get an idea of to get the basis for what your comic is about, in my opinion, you failed as the artist, because you should be able to read any comic, look at it, and go, "Oh yeah, like, it's a murder mystery." You might not have all the details, but you should be able to have the basis for what the story is about. And so my whole thing is like storytelling. That's what's always got me through the door. That's always been my strongest, probably, trait as an artist. When I was bad at actually drawing stuff, I was always good at the storytelling. And so, like, this is a silent narrative. It's just just animals in their environment doing, what they do. And it kind of makes it fun with the dinosaurs, because like, you can do all this. They were animals, right? So they occupy similar niches as we see animals here. A triceratops is probably going to be in the same category as like a moose. A tyrannosaur is going to occupy that niche of like a grizzly bear or polar bear further up north. Like it's going to be the apex predator in that biome. And now we have Nanotyrannus, which is this heavily debated medium-sized so think of a Tyrannosaurus that's fast-moving and is about 1,000 pounds. That's now been verified. So like I don't have them in this, and it takes place in the region where those were found. So it's like, well, now we have to rewrite. We got to do a whole nother chapter and bring those in. And so one of the things I don't want to do is keep remaking the same book. I just want to update the paleontology as it updates with science. And so yeah, so I'm into dinosaurs big time. But yeah, anything else? Oh, T-Rex, Nanotyrannus. I'm gonna say I think Nanotyrannus has kind of won my heart this winter. Like, if you get a chance to read the papers on Nanotyrannus, it's amazing. Also, Nanukosaurus is the official dinosaur of Alaska, and it is a similar sized tyrannosaur that's fully feathered, and it lived in the Arctic. So one of the things I've been kind of playing around with is like, can we do something involving that, something that's Alaskan based? The Alaska biome was, especially 67 million years ago, very, very unique, very unique. You had Pachyrhinosaurus, which was like this amazing ceratop. What is this? Is it 6'7"? Oh, terrible. God, 6-7 million years ago. Wow, you got me. Wow. But yeah, anything else? Any other questions? Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah. The roles are there, but technology has changed it a bit. Instead of like, say, you still have some pencil or inkers, especially like the old school guys that were before me, that are still like prolific. Those roles still exist, but like if you're starting out, you can do all of those because like lettering's done in Illustrator. You can hand draw, you can color digitally. You can. So they've kind of scrunched it, which has been at the detriment to the artist because it means like we get paid less. So like it used to be like, I'll hire you, pay you $200 for pencils. We'll hire you, and you can do $200 to do the inks, and then you guys would collab together. And if I was the editor, then you'd send me the pages when they were all done. And now it's just like, well, we'll pay you $200 to do line art. So that happened around right when I was getting out of school, when you had like digital had finally caught up, and they kind of cut out that role, and it made things very like, because like it was like guys would be like, oh yeah, man, I'm pencil, and like guys would make a really good living. Like you used to be able to make a really good living as a comic artist, and you just saw that kind of transition in the early 2000s where because they started doing that, where they started like getting rid of roles. But also print was kind of in that its death roll at the time. So like it did work out. It had to happen because you weren't selling 100,000 copies of a book. You were happy if you were selling 10,000 copies of a book. Like that's considered like a monster success industry wise. Like, oh man, we sold 15,000 copies. The book's killing it. Where like that back in the 90s and 80s and before that, if you weren't selling at least 100,000 copies of a book, it was like a failure. Like, can it? Yeah, nobody's reading it. Get rid of it. But yeah, most of the roles still. So like, I work with. I typically do everything. Like on this, I did everything. But like right now, the book I'm working with, like we got a colorist out of Ireland. My buddy, who I went to the Kubert School with, who's like an award-winning letterer. He's doing. I called him right away, and he's like, "I'm guessing you need me to letter a book." And I was like, "Yes, let's put some awards on this thing before it comes out, buddy." So yeah, so there's the writer. The weird thing is like because I'm the line art, I then have to kind of like look over, act as like a little bit of an editor. So like I have to approve all the colorist stuff because if she gets something wrong, then I have to be like, oh no, that's not right. Like that's not how that's supposed to be. So I still like I have to do concept work, like color concepts for all the characters and stuff, which is really kind of wild. But that's just kind of where we're at. Where before, like they would hire concept artists to do the character mock-ups before they even hire a team. So and that just doesn't. It's just been consolidated just because print is much smaller now. I know you had a question in the back there. Oh, you with the beard? Didn't you have your hand up? No. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, any other questions? Yes. Oh. Ooh. For being a background guy, I hate doing backgrounds. I hate doing cars. I used to have to like. I think it's funny. Like I'm doing like the thing I'm doing right now is like a neo western. Like takes place like Manchester by the Sea. It's like all New England. So and it takes place like right now, and so I'm drawing a lot of like domestic settings, right? A lot of cars and it was one of those where like I hate it. I hate having to do it. And it's just because like I don't know, you just hit a point where you're like, man, like I've done this like 10,000 million times. Really don't want to do it again. Like I don't know how many like Ford Explorers and Honda Civics I've drawn in my life, but it's just like crazy. That's probably the one. In terms of, I love drawing anything to do with like animals. I love the move, especially dinosaurs. I love playing with their movement and stuff. It's crazy. Like it took, I like to say, like it took me a whole graphic novel to get good at drawing dinosaurs. Like so that's probably my favorite thing to draw. It mostly is just comfort factor. It's probably the thing I know the best. I can draw the easiest. It just flows. I don't have to think about like people are always people are a nightmare, man. Cause like, especially if you got all this clothing, like the folds and stuff. And like, I don't like it to look like there's one of the things when they teach you to draw right, it's all about like foundational drawing, structuring. So like there's books and tutorials on like, oh, this is how the cloth folds. And it's right, but it's a simplification. And like if you look at a lot of like the older comics from the 70s and stuff, they're all using that boilerplate, the Andrew Loomis, how to draw structured, the moving the body or whatever. And, it becomes kind of uniform in the way they draw it. And so I try to rely on photo reference a little bit more. Like I'll take a photo of myself in my studio doing the pose like an idiot, and then I'll have it on a screen. And so when I'm drawing it, I'll just look at it and be like, oh, okay, we got some folds, and then I'll simplify. And like, so there's different ways of doing it. That's just my process so that I'm not just relying heavily on the like formulaic structuring of clothing folds. Because like I know guys that do that and they're very good artists, but like I can always, it gets back to the thing I said, like if we're going full circle, like I can tell what you're doing. Like you're using the boilerplate, like how to draw manual. And I try to avoid that as much as I can. Sometimes it's unavoidable, or it's just, you're just tired and you're just like, I got to get this done. So boilerplate it is. But, for the most part, I try and like, just try and keep studying. It's that whole thing of like, just being, like an artist who I used to background for told me, he was like, everything in art is, it's, it's an endurance run. Like, it's a matter of like, and the way you stay fresh is by continued learning. The people who like fall off is because at some point they get disinterested in trying to keep learning. And so as long as you keep learning, whatever it is, and whatever you do, you'll always stay somewhat fresh. You'll be relevant, and you'll keep moving forward. Like Joe Kubert, when he was like 83, I had to go into right before I left the Kubert School, I had to go into his studio. He's 83. He was editor-in-chief of DC all through the 80s. He's made more money than God drawing comics. He's got a school named after him. He's done everything. He's had everything you possibly imagine, and then some. We used to joke that he owned an island down in the Bahamas. I don't know if he actually did, but he may have. And I walked into his office and he was like on the computer. I'm like, what are you doing, Joe? Because Joe doesn't use computers. And he's like, oh. And he's doing this book series at DC called Tor. I go, Joe, what are you doing, man? And he was like, "Oh, I'm learning to color. Did you know you can use these programs to do all the coloring now?" I'm like, "Why? I mean, don't you have other people?" He's like, "Yeah, but you just gotta know how to do it. You gotta at least know how to do it. Like, how can I work with other artists when if I don't know how they're coloring my books?" And I was like, man, that like blew my mind. Where it's like, oh man, that's such a refreshing take. Because like, I don't know another artist over the age of 50 right now that's like, oh yeah, I got to keep getting better and learning. And meanwhile, Joe's over there like, yeah, I just mastered Photoshop. I'm going to start digitally coloring my own books now. Yeah. And you're like, okay. Yeah. So I don't know. It's just, it's that whole thing. Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, any of the creator owned stuff from Joe. Like he did a book that when I first came to his school, I'm talking about Joe a lot, but like Joe's probably I didn't like really have grandparents growing up, Joe, and so like being there and having that kind of figure that had goals, that was probably, it sounds weird because I didn't know him that well. I just he's an instructor kind of. That was the closest thing I had to like I guess you could say a grandfather really. But that first year I was at the school, I didn't know anything. I was just working. I didn't really socialize it because I just kind of viewed it as like I'm not here to play. I'm here to work. And he had a book that he did, I think in the early '90s, called Jew Gangster, and it was about it. It wasn't about his life, but it was about like his family fled the Nazis in the '30s, right? And so they were in like the Jewish slums in New York City. I forget which borough or something he was in, but it was about one of the ways that like people would make money is you could get with the mafia. So if you were a kid, you could get a job, running numbers for the mob from different businesses and stuff there in New York. We've all seen those movies, right? Goodfellas and all that type of stuff. And so he did a book called Jew Gangster, and it was about a kid in the '30s who was new to New York. His dad was working down at the docks, making nothing. They're just scrounging by to get by, right? But then he sees this guy with this fancy car, and then like networks with him, and the guy gives him a job, and then it's like him working his way up as he's growing into a young man, working for like where he's like he respects this guy Tony more than he respects his own dad, and his dad's like the real hero. He's the guy that's like working hard every day, doing what he's supposed to do, but this other guy found like an easier route, and so it's an interesting book of like the way Joe draws the city. It really is very Will Eisner-ish, where like it kind of comes alive, where it feels kind of organic, right? And Joe had a very organic style, but for me, it was very like groundbreaking because I'd only seen like kind of superhero comics at that point, and here was like a real story where a guy's pulling from his real life experiences, and he's telling this fantastic story about like this kid that's like like there's a great sequence where his high school buddies come over, and he's got an apartment, right? He's like 16 with an apartment. He's got a girlfriend and everything, and they're like, oh hey, you gonna go see that new movie King Kong? It just came out. He's like, yeah, we went and saw it. We went and saw it early down because that like they were like they owned the theater or whatever, or so they could just go in wherever they wanted. And it was just, I don't know, it's just like I could imagine Joe being in that position where he's like, oh, talking to a buddy of his, like, oh, did you go see yeah, I've seen it before, who cares? Like we're people growing up too fast. And it's just interesting. It was interesting. It was really like, oh man, there's way more. You can really do some powerful stuff with comics. There's Facts from Sarajevo that he did that was like he was networking with a guy while that was all going down, with the Civil War. And there was an artist that he was faxing with, and so he did a graphic novel about that. And if he was alive and you asked him, that it used to be that he would say that was his favorite book, like that's the one that he thought was his best. He did another book that was, I can't remember the name of it, but it was like interviews with like Green Berets from Vietnam, and he did it all in pencil, and it was just like the little stories they would tell from like being overseas, like while they were there. But then he'd turn around and do Hawkman for DC, yeah. I can't even remember the question. I got kind of lost in the sauce there. Sorry. Yeah. Oh, favorite books, right? Yeah. Yeah. Anything from Joe. If you like superheroes, I still think the Ultimates is probably one of the coolest things they've done. I was like is nice seeing the Avengers done in like a realistic take. I mean, it led to the Avengers movies, whether you like them or not. Like I think those first two volumes of the Ultimates still hold up. We Three's a good one. If you've ever read that, I think it was Grant Morrison. Is like experimenting on animals and using them as like to make like biological weapons, and then the animals escape, but they've been manipulated so they can kind of like communicate. So it's like a rabbit, a cat, and a dog, and they escape this government facility, and they're like being hunted down by the experimentors. It's called We Three. Frank Quietly is the artist on it, and Grant Morrison. That is, my wife doesn't even read comics, and she would probably agree with me that was probably one of the best comics. It's just, I think it's like 4 issues. It's very short. If you don't cry, then you're a monster. It's very sad. It's good. It's really good. Cretaceous is a really good one. I think I have like 10 copies left or so, maybe 8 copies. There's a few left on the table. I know, it's an interesting thing, right? Like I have my favorites, but like that doesn't mean that other people will like it. There's a really good book. I can't remember the guy who made it, but there's a book called Tommysaurus Rex, and it was kind of a take on. Did anybody read the book The Enormous Egg? Way back. We're talking old, like I think it's from the 60s. Basically, it's about a kid who finds an egg, and a giant oversized egg in his parents' chicken coop, and then it hatches, and it's a baby dinosaur, and then he grows up then he raises it, and of course, like problems come with having a dinosaur, and so that was the premise of The Enormous Egg. Tommysaurus Rex is kind of the same thing, but it's with a T-Rex, same premise, but then things escalate because it's like there's like some bullies that come into it and stuff, and like the ending is just like it's the first time I think I cried reading like a cartoony comic. Is really, really good. I'm not really a fan of the creator, but like I can't deny how good it is. Like he's kind of an odd guy, but that book is just phenomenal. So I would recommend that for like if you got kids, like they're gonna cry in your bedroom after they read it, but you should get it for them. It's good. There's so many. Any what books? Uh, that's tough. I don't really operate in the kids arena. I I do a lot of like young adult, I guess, and even that's like 80s young adult by 1985 standards. So like RoboCop, Predator. When they take the most violent movies and be like, oh wow, kids like it. Let's make a kids cartoon. Like I grew up under that, so like I'm pretty bad when it comes to like the kids books. I mean, there's so yeah, I that was a huge battle with the publisher because I was like, this isn't for kids, and they originally wanted to make it for like 4 and 6, and I'm like, no one's gonna buy it, and I would take the work, and I printed up like little samples of it, and I actually took it to test markets. Like I would take it to conventions and see who resonates with it, and it like the biggest demo. And I think it's because, and you see it in paleontology, was 13 to 16-year-old girls, because like even though paleontology has traditionally been like kind of a male-dominated profession, since then it's like kind of flipped. It's like you've got so many young ladies that are going into it, and so like I would take this. I kept telling them, I was like, dude, because they would want to do all this, like they want to do all this weird graphic design. I was like, no, it needs to be vibrant, it needs to be bold, simple on the cover. I go, the demographic is going to be 13 to like 15-year-old girls. Trust me. They're like, you don't know what you're talking about. We've been making books for 30 years. You have no idea. Sure enough, when they took it to LA and the initial sales came in, it was all 11 to 15-year-old girls were the ones that were buying it. Even when I go to conventions, like if I do a big convention in Seattle, it's all young ladies that are coming up and buying. Occasionally I'll get a few dudes, but it's always like, they're like, yeah. And the thing I did purposely in this book is I didn't distinguish any of the sexes of the animals. You see animals in roles, like there's a family unit in here, but I purposely left things open to interpretation so that like a young like say someone will get the book, the story is the same, but the roles are always, depending on who you talk to who's read it, the roles are always open to interpretation. So for some people it's like, oh yeah, it's a mother trying to reunite with her young Rex that gets, after it gets attacked by another species, like and then other guys are like, oh, the dad's like out for revenge after they killed his wife, and it's yeah, and you do stuff like that, and I think it opens things up. That's kind of why one of the things I like most about doing this is that it leaves a lot of open areas where it's like, it's that power of like less is more sometimes for readers. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? I don't know how long we're going here. Oh, okay, cool. Okay, we got a couple more minutes left. Any more questions? Yeah, any more questions? I'm having fun. This is good. Yeah. Anything else? Is what's up? It has become the Q&A. Any more questions? Listen, it might be 2000, the 2020s, but this business is ran like it's the 1920s. Word of mouth, word of mouth. I mean, like if I wouldn't have lived in Portland, which was like at the time the highest collective like comic professionals. I mean, you had like Brian Bendis and David Mack and like all these juggernaut like known commodities. If I wasn't there, and I wasn't particularly, if I hadn't done that internship at the studio, because the studio, everybody knew about it, so people would like come in, like you'd be in there one day, and I mean, I've never been there, but apparently like there's been like celebrities that'll just walk in, like I think like Keanu Reeves or something just like walked in because he's doing comics now these days. Yeah, they get all kinds of people that used to just walk in through the door there, and so by me being there and like not even present, but just like, oh, the guy who ran it, the senior guys were the guys I did primarily. I can't name them out of respect, but they were the ones who ran the studio. But I was their key background guy. So if somebody came in and was like, man, I'm behind deadline, I need somebody to help out, those guys would be like, oh yeah, call Tad. Yeah, here's his number. Shoot, or here's his email. Shoot him. He'll do it. He's a glutton for punishment. Yeah, he'll do it. No problem. Yeah. Oh yeah. We have zero regulation. There's been talk, like there's been a few people that like pushed for unions back in like the 80s, but which I feel like they should do them. Like I fully feel like they should do something, because you get burned, you get taken advantage of. I mean, you hear about actors who are in the union that get burned and taken advantage of. But the only way you could ever get something like that in such a odd industry is it would need to come from like the biggest names with the biggest sales, somebody like a Dogman type guy, or like a Jim Lee, or something. And like the reality is by not being unioned, those guys can make a lot more money. I mean, and that's just kind of the sad truth. We're like kind of like carnival workers, almost, like a little bit. Carnival workers might even be unionized at this point, for all I know. I used to say we were like pro wrestlers a little bit, but I think they're even union now. I think we're like one of the last industries that's not. I will say, if you do get with like everything's negotiable, like contractually. So if you get like an offer and I've only had one of these offers once and I turned it down, thank God. But like if you get like say Marvel and DC, right? Everybody knows them. They're the two big. They're always competing to get the best artists, and they'll lock them in contract. So like you're getting like, if you're, I don't know, Daniel Warren Johnson, or I'm just throwing names out there, but it's really just Joe Schmo, the most celebrated comic artist at the moment. They would probably throw a contract at you, and you could negotiate. Okay, I need a guaranteed X amount of money a year with benefits. I got kids. I need dental, full health, and they'll be like, yeah, sure, no problem. And so they'll just give it to you, either whether they're paying for it or they just get you on the company. And if you're a real big name, they might not even give you any work. Like the Kubert brothers I was talking about, they get those deals. So like there was a time where Adam hadn't even had anything come out in like a couple of years. And DC just was like, they just had him like on the contract. And now he's at Marvel. And I think he's got the same deal. And I think part of his contract, he's like, well, I want to at least just draw Wolverine. So, occasionally you see him do some type of Wolverine thing here and there, he just kind of picks and chooses what he wants. And I mean, that's, he also worked in the industry for 40 years. He's the son of Joe Kubert, he's like Jack Kirby, but nobody knows who he is. He's like the quieter version of Jack Kirby in terms of like prolificness in the industry. No, that's part of your contract. So it's called an exclusive. No, no. So like I was offered right before I moved to Alaska, I was offered that with Dark Horse. But Dark Horse isn't the same size as Marvel and DC. And at the time I was doing cover work for a company called IDW. They published like Turtles, Godzilla. At the time they had G.I. Joe and a few others. And so I was like, well, why would I turn down? I'm getting work. You guys want to sign me to a 2-year exclusive to do a book that's not even going to come out in the States. It was for a winery. Don't ask me why. I don't know the details. It was weird. It was a whole weird thing. The pay was great, but it was like one of those where like, I don't want to turn down the work that like people are seeing on the shelf. Like that's how people know who I am, to do a book that no one's going to read or see. And then also literally 3 days after that happened, the book got indefinitely postponed, which is like the contract way of saying like, we're not going to make the book. Technically, I'm still, as of now, 10 years later, still contracted to do the book, but it's just not not put into production. So it's just like things are on pause. That's like how they get around like having to try and pay people like kill fees and stuff like that. It's really strange. It's, like it's for the lawyers to figure out, I guess. But yeah, so like so I said, me saying no, like what would have happened is in the contract, I wasn't guaranteed pay whether I was working. I was just guaranteed a project. So if I said yes to that exclusive, right, I would have had to turn down all my work with Turtles and Godzilla, and I would have had to, I wouldn't have gotten a paycheck, but I also wouldn't have been allowed to work for 2 years. So it just lucked out that I said no, because I was really tempted. I was like, oh man, this could like make all my hopes and dreams come true. But it would have just made it where it's like, oh, I would have had to go do something else, or go back to ghosting, because I just quit ghosting. So it's like, you gotta like, sometimes things happen for a reason and you just have to, I don't know. But that's again, like if we had a union, that type of stuff wouldn't happen. I like how this turned into like union talk. Like, yeah, come on, power to the worker. Yeah. I want to keep working, so I'm not in a weight class where I can start throwing those words around. Yeah, that's what I should be. Again, then it would be like, oh, what's he writing about? Yeah, let's get rid of him. I'll just disappear. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, all right. Anything else real quick? Nobody? One last one. Do I make any more books that are made by me? Yeah. If you come, oh, here I can plug myself. If you come over to the, what do we call that hall? The vendor room. I've got a table where I'm selling copies of Cretaceous. I have I have new copies of Bukisha of the Badland, which is a spec project that I did during October. Was it Inktober? And then I also have the first chapter of, it's a more mature book, but it's a sci-fi book called Taiga. So you can come and check any of those out if you want to. And they're all for sale. And I'll sign any of them too. So yeah, cool. Anything that will go? All good? Yeah. All right. Thank you.